started. Hi, and welcome to the second season of Literature Berks. My name is Amanda Hornberger. I'm the Program Director at Jewish Federation of Reading Berks and the co-chair of Literature Berks. On behalf of our entire Literature Berks committee, I'm thrilled to welcome you to this series of programs. Literature Berks is a community-wide celebration of books and authors presented by the Jewish Federation of Reading Berks in partnership with Exeter Community Library and Sinking Spring Public Library and the Jewish Book Council. In the chat, you can see a link to purchase signed copies of As Needed for Pain and Smacked through our official book vendor, Reeds & Company Bookshop. Literature Berks is happy to support a local independent bookstore, and we encourage you to continue to shop local during this time. And always remember that books make great gifts. Throughout the webinar, feel free to type any questions you may have into the Q&A function, and we will do our best to answer questions throughout the program. Eilene Zimmerman is a journalist and a social worker. For 3 decades, she has written about business, technology, and social issues for a wide array of national magazines and newspapers. She was a columnist for the New York Times Sunday Business section for 6 years, and since 2004 has been a regular contributor to the newspaper. Just this month, she completed a master's degree in social work. Dan Perez was the editor-in-chief of Details for 15 years, starting in 2000, when the title relaunched under his leadership. During his tenure, the magazine won many awards, including 2 National Magazine Awards. Before taking the editorship of Details, Dan spent 9 years at W Magazine, overseeing bureaus in Paris, London, and Milan. While in college, he worked as a copy boy at the New York Times and later as a research assistant at Esquire. He is also the author of Details Men's Style Manual. Our moderator tonight is Rabbi Yosef Lipsker, who has worked as a consultant for Caron Treatment Center since 2000. His presence has provided spiritual support and guidance to Jewish patients and families as they struggle to heal from the consequences of addiction. The centerpiece of his service to Caron families is his hosting of a weekly Friday night service and Shabbat dinners for patients. The rabbi also provides counsel to patients and families prior to and through the course of inpatient treatment. I'm honored to welcome Eilene Zimmerman, Dan Perez, and Rabbi Lipsker to Literature Berks.
Okay, the centerpiece of our work is inviting people to our home. So pray for me because the COVID is still here. One of the biggest challenges people have with addiction is the stigma. The stigma with, especially when you're part of a community, a Jewish community, for those that have experienced it, it's horrible because the minute you want to get help is the minute you get exposed. And so it's difficult to get help. And it's called the anonymous program. So people are very much silent about their problem. You could be sitting next to someone who's an addict and never know it your entire life because they go to meetings and they take care of themselves, but you don't know anything about their addiction. And so this is an incredible opportunity to have an addict who has written about his life and a family member who has had enough courage to talk about the horrible findings of something she did not know about and eventually found out about. This is every single person addict story. And many times we don't have the chance to get into the minds and hearts of these people, at least if you're not part of the program. And so tonight, I believe, is going to be a great platform to give people insight, and also for those that are struggling with addiction, to know that there are people out there that are willing to talk. And even if you are not ready to expose yourself, you can be anonymous. It's okay to be anonymous. But the fact that people are going to expose themselves this evening and have done so through their books is a great, great service, and that is going to save many lives. So without further ado, I wanted to, again, Dan and Eilene, so thankful that you both are here. And I think we're going to start with Dan, because one of the things that, just give you just a little bit, people don't know how much the addicts suffer. They say, oh, well, they've done this to themselves. But often, and almost every time, there's a story behind why an addict ends up suffering so much alone, silently, not getting help, shame, guilt, and other things that prevent them from getting help. And there's an internal suffering, and that internal suffering causes them to, that's not their problem, but that's their solution, and they go to this addiction. And Dan is going to give us a little bit of an insight of his story and how it drove him to, and we'll talk about the addiction part of it, and eventually we will talk about the recovery and the the light at the end of the tunnel. Thank you, Dan. And then Eilene, of course, we're going to talk about the other side, the family dynamics.
Thank you, Rabbi. I'm very happy to be here. I'm very happy to be here with you, Eilene. Listen, you're absolutely right. It's the stigma associated with addiction is in some instances as powerful.
Alert from Google Chrome. He lost his kindergarten teaching job.
I think that the stigma associated with addiction it can be just as powerful as the addiction itself. And in my case, I think there's a myth in this country that those that are opiate addicts were addicted to other drugs and were constantly partying and found their way to opioids, and that wasn't the case with me. Mine is a very common story. There's certainly lots of elements of my story that make it unique and uniquely mine, but for the most part, it's an incredibly common story. I injured myself and I was prescribed opioids as a treatment and to help me manage the pain. Ultimately, in my case, I became addicted, and my addiction kind of started to dominate my life, as it often does. I had two things. I had a big job in New York media. I was running a magazine, and from the outside looking in, I had everything one might think. But on the inside, I was actually quite broken, and I was had a profound addiction to prescription painkillers. The pain that you feel when you're an addict, particularly when you recognize that you're an addict and when you understand that you want to stop, is massive. And the fear of discovery, as you said, Rabbi, the fear of people finding out that you're an addict is enough to stop you from raising your hand and saying you need help. And it stopped me. And I went for years wanting to stop, but terrified to ask for help because of that stigma. There's shame involved with it. That I knew in my case that I would bring shame to my family if I were to have come forward. The reality is that this is in every community. It is sweeping across the country, and it is it's in all communities. It's the great equalizer. It does not discriminate in any way, and in all likelihood, we all know someone or are connected in some way to someone, whether we know it or not, that is struggling with addiction or has gone through this. And I'm incredibly grateful to be here tonight to talk to you and to talk to Eilene, because I shouldn't be here. And this addiction should have killed me, and this addiction tried to kill me many times. And so I feel incredibly blessed and grateful.
And one of the things we know about addiction is they call it a family disease. And a lot of the families get very offended by that statement because they didn't do anything wrong. Just their loved one has a problem. And one thing we know is that you need to be part of the solution, but if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. But how can you be part of the solution if you don't even know that your loved one has an addiction? And this is really Eileen's story. Eilene did not know something was very wrong, but she did not know what was wrong. And when you say disease, that disease was affecting her life every day. So it was the disease that became a family disease. Her family, her children all suffered. They didn't know why. And Eilene is going to shed some light on what it feels like to be a family member that goes through this horrible, horrible experience. And really, it's amazing that you want to share about this, and we're grateful to you.
Well, thank you for having me here, Rabbi. And it's good to be here with Dan, too. So in my situation, it was my ex-husband, which might seem odd to some people listening because we were not married, but we had a very codependent divorce. And We had 2 kids we were raising together, and he was a very, very busy, high-power lawyer. So I went from being the wife to kind of being the personal assistant, kind of managing all the personal aspects of our life with children and co-parenting. And my ex-husband, Peter, was a lawyer and didn't have a ton of friends. So I sort of stayed his friend, and he felt like family. We were married for 20 years. So when he became sick, our lives were pretty intertwined, and his behavior became really erratic. He physically was very sick. He was losing weight. But it was the erratic behavior and things that affected us as a family. Like he became very critically sick after our daughter left for college, and we still had a teenage son at home who he would forget to pick up at school, or he would just leave there, at school for hours in the dark when all of my son's friends had left. He would miss all of his sporting events. He was in a band. He missed all of those events. He would lie to me all the time about why he was late or where he was or why I couldn't reach him or why he hadn't paid his monthly spousal support, which I really needed to live. He was a lawyer and I was a writer, so there was a big discrepancy in our income. So all his drug use affected all of that because I didn't understand why he was behaving so erratically and irresponsibly. And of course, in hindsight, he was also doing terribly irresponsible things, like our 15-year-old son was learning to drive in California, and he was letting him get on a 5-lane freeway at rush hour, and he would fall asleep, or he would drive him somewhere when he was high. And my son would say, "Oh, Dad drives so fast," or he parked up on the curb. And I would think, like, what is going on? And all of these things affected us in that way until he finally died. And in the book, if you read it, I'm the one who found him because he was so sick with our kids. And I think his addiction caused all of us to feel enormous guilt that we hadn't recognized it, hadn't tried to save him, quote unquote, especially for my young children who were teenagers. My son for a long time said that, no matter what people told him, he was always going to feel inside part of him that he was responsible for his father's death. And as you can imagine, as a 16-year-old, he was not in any way responsible, but it took a lot of education around addiction and the struggle to get free of it. And as Dan said, I think my ex-husband was a very intelligent, very proud man, very arrogant, and was not going to ask for help because he feared that it would tear his life apart. He'd lose his job, he'd lose his family, he would embarrass himself, us all. And then finally, I would say that after his death, it was very, very difficult to talk about what happened to him for a lot of reasons. But one was because my daughter especially felt great shame that this had happened to her family. Her father was well educated. Her mom was pretty educated. They were successful. She went to private school, all of that. But here, her father had an intravenous drug addiction. So it shows you that it affects everyone, and it affected all of us. I think we'll always be impacted for the rest of our lives by what happened.
So what was the turning point, Eilene, for you to come out? I mean, this was a secret, right? Big secret.
Right.
So what was the turning point telling people about it, was okay.
Yeah.
Writing a book now and telling the world, that was quite a different story.
It was 2 things. One was right after Peter died, nothing was explicitly said to me, but there was a lot of implicit messages I got from his law firm, which is a very powerful Silicon Valley-based firm, that I should keep quiet. And I needed them to help me sort through, he had died suddenly and there was a lot of loose ends. And so I did. And I felt very afraid to say the truth. And my daughter was very afraid for people to know. And one day I was his executor, and I was at an office building at the accounting firm, and I was leaving the firm, and there was a paralegal that had worked with Peter that saw me, and she'd been at the funeral a year and a half earlier, and she was saying, "Oh my gosh, what everybody said, like he was only 51. He used to run marathons. How did this happen?" And I had this line I would say to people. I would say, "Well, he was living a very unhealthy life." So I wasn't lying, but I wasn't telling the truth. And my daughter happened to call me right after this, and I started crying, and I said, "I'm so sick of lying about this and not being able to say what happened." And she said, "Well, then why don't you?" And from that, I wound up writing a piece for the New York Times about what happened to Peter and what was going on in the legal industry. And I got, that piece got like 2 million shares. And I got so much email from that, also from other professionals like Dan, like lawyers in finance, technology, who were suffering, their families who were suffering. And so from that, I thought, well, there's something here. So I'm going to tell my story in a bigger way and raise awareness of this and make some sense out of this, what seems like a senseless death.
What's fascinating is not only is the addict ashamed, not only is the family ashamed, but it sounds like the workplace, they didn't either want anyone to know about this.
No, I think it was shame, and it was also probably greed. I mean, I think this was a partner running a lot of cases, and he was impaired.
So they whatever it was, they didn't want to have the stigma around them.
Absolutely, and I can't blame them. And in that field, you don't want to admit vulnerability or weakness, and they certainly didn't need that. Yeah, so why look further into it? Yeah, absolutely.
So Dan, what was your rock bottom? What was the turning point for you?
I will get to that in 1 second, but if it's okay, Rabbi, I would love to just sort of touch on something that Eilene said. You know, the awareness that I have now, years later, of what I put my family through, is pretty clear. In the moment, though, an addict, you know, cares really only about two things. One, getting drugs, and two, protecting this secret. And so the lying that you talk about is something that exists in all addicts. We're all liars, and we will lie, and we will create elaborate lies, and we will create unbelievable lies, and we will stick with those unbelievable lies. And I had times in my life where people called me out on lying, and I would get offended that they would suggest that I was lying. And so gaslighting becomes a part of this also. And I just have to say, it's incredibly, I mean, you and I know one another a little bit, and I think it's just extraordinary that you're sharing your story, because, you know, I know how difficult it is for families, and I know that from my own family, and I know how much they suffer, and I know how much pain they are in, and so I think it's just extraordinary. So thank you for doing that. As to your question, Rabbi, I had one long rock bottom. I couldn't get out of bed in the morning without the drugs. I couldn't get through my day without the drugs, and I couldn't get back into bed at night without the drugs. It was as essential to me as oxygen is, and quite frankly, if I had to choose, I would have chosen drugs over oxygen. And so I had a lot of low points, and you know, look, I can look back on them now and share them, you know, with ease. But it was a really very painful and dark time. But as I said, I had this job, and you know, Eilene talked about her ex-husband, you know, nodding off in the car while her son was driving. I would nod off all the time. I once was interviewing someone for a job that I was looking to hire. And in the middle of that job interview, where I'm essentially holding this person's resume and talking to them, I nodded out in the middle of that interview. Wow. You sort of spring back to life, you know, but it's a very noticeable thing. There are a few things that you can say to distract from that, and I drove down to Tijuana and bought pills illegally, 1,000 of them, and smuggled them back across the border. But for me, it was the lying that is really one of the biggest lows, because you know, they say this, and it's true. If an addict's lips are moving, they're lying, and I'm here to tell you that that's the truth.
So the first thing I'd like to just interject, a lot of people don't understand this. Addicts are not necessarily liars. They will tell the truth about everything. But there's one thing they won't tell the truth about, and that is when, and basically that becomes everything. But they're not the personality, they've never lied before drugs. And some of them are, but most of them are just nice people that just got stuck behind this terrible situation. And if anyone finds out, someone blows their cover, they're done in their mind. And so the only thing you can do is lie. So I just think it's important to say, not all a bunch of liars because but they will lie about the drugs. And it's kind of horrible. So the thing that I think is important to talk about, and I think we can both of you can answer a little bit about this, is you were a functioning drug addict. You got away with it pretty much. You were able to get up in the morning with the drugs, stay working with the drugs, going back, moving your life along. Obviously, internally, you were destroyed, falling apart. And this is another thing that people have, they say, oh, my husband is working, he's making a living, or my wife is working, my son is working, So a lot of times this blinds people's vision of what's really going on underneath the hood because they're very successful at really pulling the wool over everyone's eyes. And I think, so what was it that actually, you were obviously doing a great job, but what you woke up one morning and said, I had enough, or something happened?
Every time I would run out of drugs, I would start to feel horrible. I would go through withdrawal, and it would be a very painful and present reminder of how what felt in the beginning like a nice sort of fun recreational thing, how that had become a full-blown addiction, and I wanted to stop. Ultimately, it wasn't until my wife at the time was pregnant with our oldest child, our first child, that I realized, and with her help, certainly to her credit, that it was time, and that I needed to stop. But as we know, you can't get an addict to stop. The addict has to be ready to stop, and I was ready, and had been ready for a while, but it wasn't until I stepped forward and said, I'm a drug addict and I need help, that I was able to actually receive that help. And that seems like a simple thing to say. I asked for help and I got help, but the asking for help was a really difficult thing to do. But the recovery community embraced me and forever changed my life.
So what did you do? You went to rehab, or did you just start going to meetings? What did you actually do?
I started going to 12-step meetings, and I started doing that every day. I went to an outpatient program in Manhattan, an intensive outpatient program, and I was doing that, I think maybe 3 nights a week for 90 minutes in a group. And I started to learn who I was for the first time in my life, Rabbi. And I was in my 30s, and I was just beginning to discover who I was. And there are lots of phases to recovery. Certainly stopping taking the drugs is incredibly important, but that's just the thing that puts you on the path to recovery. And then you have to do the work in recovery as you move through your recovery. And people will say in 12-step programs, I wish you a long and slow recovery, and that's initially when I heard that, I was like, God, what do people mean? Because like any good addict, you want instant gratification. I used to think, God, I wish there was a pill I could take to help me stop taking the pills. But I am in the middle of a long and slow recovery, and I'm full of gratitude for that. The 12-step program was incredibly, incredibly helpful to me.
Yeah, and maybe we'll have a little more time to talk about the 12-step program, but I'd like to ask Eilene, you know, at the end of the day, as Dan said, you have to be ready to give it up. On the other hand, we know that families sometimes intervene, and I'm not using the fancy word intervention, but they intervene. It could be many different levels. Intervention doesn't need to be like, a massive surprise party, but sometimes it is. And so I know it's the reason I'm asking the question is not to put like anguish or guilt onto you, but the question is, what do you do, or what would you do if you were able to, in retrospect, and the reason I'm asking is because I want to give people, the listeners, a chance to say, what can I do if I suspect that something is going on? What can I do? And what would you have done?
Yeah. I think the first thing was I didn't suspect, because I had so many internal biases against Peter or someone like Dan being a quote unquote addict. I think the preferred language now is someone who's struggling with an addiction, because I thought, well, he's wealthy and white and well educated, and I was thinking it would be somebody poor, indigent, someone who was so bleak. That was the best option. You're not this guy who's living in a $2 million beach house and had the resources to have anything he needed, including great psychotherapy, and also he was so smart. He was a chemist before he became a lawyer. So he knew exactly what those chemicals would do to the brain and the body. So it didn't make any sense to me. And also I was being gaslit. Everything Dan described pretty much, like, we had the last Thanksgiving he was alive, we actually decided to do it at a restaurant. We used to go up to my cousins in LA. We still did it together as a family, and they weren't having it. And he was 30 minutes late, and there was only one of these restaurants in San Diego. It was not that big a city. And he gets there, and I said, I don't understand it. How are you so late? And he said, well, I couldn't find it. And I said, well, there's only one, Mr. A's was the name of it in San Diego. And he said, I don't know what to tell you. I plugged it in the GPS and it sent me the wrong way. And I remember thinking, like, well, that's so weird, but I guess that's true. Like, nothing made sense. Or he'd say, I was 2 hours late to get our son from high school. He'd say, it's traffic. And I said to him, I checked traffic. There's no traffic. And he said, there was an accident. And I thought, I guess the traffic was wrong. So all of those things. So my biases prevented me from seeing it. But I will say, about 3 weeks before he died, we were on the phone, and he must have been somewhere buying drugs, because I didn't recognize the sounds in the background. There was music. He was a lawyer. He was 51 years. He didn't usually after work go to a place with lots of music. There was chairs scraping around. And I said to him, what is wrong with you? What is going on with you? And he said, he was diagnosed with Hashimoto's disease, which is a thyroid condition. And one of the hallmark symptoms is weight gain. And he'd lost 50 pounds. And that was another one where I said, this is not right. Let me take you to another endocrinologist, and he said, I just started taking the medicine. It's going to work. But during this conversation, I said to him, what is going on with you? The kids come up for the weekend and you're sleeping the whole weekend. And he said, what do you want me to do, Eilene? You want me to tell the kids I'm very sick? And I thought, oh my gosh, he is very sick. And I said to him, if I were you, I would get myself to a clinic and figure out what the heck is wrong with me. And what I wished I'd done is said to him, I'm really worried about you. I love you. I care about you. Let me help you. Tell me what's going on. When you're ready to, I will help you. I will, and I would have. And I also think if he'd felt that he could at work, if he'd said to, or if someone at work had said to him, I can tell you're struggling with something. I don't know exactly what it is, but I want you to know when you're ready to get help, I'm here. And I'm going to do everything I can to make sure you don't lose your job. Everything is okay. Because as you were saying, Rabbi, and as Dan was saying, there's in psychology, there's the stages of change when you're ready. And you can be at pre-contemplation, contemplation, you can be ready to change. But if you're not at that point where you're ready to change, nobody telling you to change is going to make you do it. And so I think Peter kept thinking he could just quit himself. He had everything kind of ready at home, that he was just going to lock himself in his bedroom and go through withdrawal himself. And obviously he could not. So I wish I had done that. I wish I had handled it differently instead of just giving up and thinking, I can't figure this out. If I had offered myself up more fully to him and said, I'm here, make use of me, let me help you.
Well, actually, if you read the book that you wrote, you would have had the answer.
That's what I was hoping in writing it, is that someone else would read it and think, oh yeah, now I know what my husband has.
It's important. It's important to say that, because I really, you leaned on the question about almost the guilt part of it, and I can understand that, if I only knew, but really what you're telling people is there's something Eilene knows, and she's writing it in a book to tell people that you need to ask more questions, because yes, Dan, you said it's true, the person has to be ready, but sometimes we could do something to get them, to speed up the process and to get them into treatment and to help people move in the right direction. It's not easy, but it's done. And so we have to keep in mind, for someone listening tonight, or who knows where one person we may help, will know that they could do something about the situation. Not always will you succeed, but at least you're on a path. And
forgive me, Rabbi, I'm sorry. I think that I think you're absolutely right. And I think Eilene is absolutely right in that letting them know that you're on to them is actually incredibly important. But to Eileen's point, doing it in the context of saying, I love you, I'm here for you. We hear a lot in a lot of talk around addiction about tough love and things like that. And that's an individual thing, however you want to sort of approach someone. But in my opinion, I think it's incredibly important to let the addict know that you love them and want to support them and want to help them. And you can do that and not enable them at the same time. Right. And so, Eilene, I think the way you said that was really kind of perfect. And I've been asked a number of times in recent years, what do I say to someone if I think that they're an addict? And I said, you tell them that, and you call them out on their shit. Oh, sorry, Rabbi. You call them out on it, and you tell them.
I'm just saying that I've been to meetings and they use many different. So just
pejorative, yeah. I mean,
yeah. I'm sorry. I that was far too colorful.
That's why they have the Yom Kippur Day, to atone for.
Yes,
and
exactly.
we're cut from the same cloth. I'm having to be very careful.
Yeah. But anyway, I think it's important to let them know that even and it is it's even if you're not 100% sure. Hey, I know there's something going on. Right. And again, I think to Eileen's point, when you're ready to talk about it, I'm right here. And I will be happy to talk to you about it and help you to the degree that I can. And I think people need to hear that.
That's wonderful. And and like the rabbi was saying, you can say something. It's also to speak to Dan, Peter. And in a lot of families, he was a very powerful person in our lives. And so I was also afraid to call him out on it. So I think there was a part of me that was like, I wanted to say something. I had asked his boss, like, why didn't you pull him into a conference room and say, something's going on with you? And he said, sort of like, what if it's cancer? What if it's, it's not my place to intervene. And so I think, well, maybe we need more compassionate workplaces too. We need to be able to say like, hey, I care about you. And something's not right here. I'm here, like Dan said, and I want to help,
I mean, and just, it's important to note that there is a lot of focus in workplaces to allow people, I see them on the other end, to allow people to get better. Workplaces help people get into treatment. They will, there's the physician's assistance program, for instance. If you are a doctor, okay, a doctor's using drugs, that's bad. I don't want my doctor using drugs. But they basically go in instead of the state, and they will protect the doctor, at the same time force the doctor to get better. So there's a lot of, today they have a lot of firefighters, first responders, all at treatment today, because it's becoming more of a known approach. And also, I mean, Dan, I totally agree with you about the love, not the tough love, but the love. And it does work. And this has been definitely my approach. And that's why I say this intervention with the surprise parties are usually not the prettiest things, but having a heart-to-heart with someone could go so far and so much more effective with less resistance. So I think that that's an important point, for people listening, that, sometimes you break down, you cry, you say, hey, listen, I love you. I don't want to see you this way. And I mean, Eilene, when you were telling the story, tears came to my eyes because I know what, I've seen it so many times. The person there, you want to do anything in the world to save their life. You know something's wrong, but you don't know what to do. And this is, coming together tonight is really, I think, giving a lot of material.
I'm so sorry about that. I'll turn that off.
Wait till my computer starts talking. It could say anything. I don't know what it's going to say. So, I mean, not because I'm a rabbi, I'm going to jump in and ask Dan about this, but because it's so important and so part of the program. How did spirituality connect with you during this process? Was it an important tool? How did you connect?
Thank you for asking that, Rabbi. It is perhaps the most important tool, and I think is the bedrock upon which my recovery is built. Belief in a higher power and developing a spiritual connection is just a cornerstone of my sobriety today. I wasn't able to do it alone, and I tried. And Eilene, you talked about Peter. What is he going to do? Close himself off in a room and go through and detox. I did that so many times because I was just arrogant enough to think that I could outsmart it. I was just arrogant enough to think that I can be the one person that can figure out a way around this, because life came easy to me, or at least so it appeared. And Eilene talked earlier about white privilege, and I think it's important to mention that I was able to capitalize on the fact that I was a white man in a powerful job. It was easier for me to shield my addiction from outside exposure, but so back to your point, but I couldn't do it alone ultimately. And spirituality remains to this day, one of the most important things in my life outside of my children. And it takes all shapes and sizes, as you know, Rabbi. And I know people that in recovery that are devout Catholics, and I know people that are Buddhists, but the spiritual connection is incredibly important, and the belief in a higher power is incredibly important. Is it essential to recovery? No, it's not. And everyone has their own path. I'm one man, and I can only talk about my experience. But to me, it is essential, and to me, and without it, I'm not here talking to you right now.
And I think it's also about community. I think it's about the community that's also spiritual. You find so many different people with different backgrounds, rich and poor, coming to these meetings, and you basically it's a melting pot. It becomes a common ground for everybody and all. It doesn't matter who you are, but you all are equal. And I think that place is a spiritual place to be in, because we tear our clothes off, we tear our external off, and we bare our souls. And I think that's also, so whether you believe in something, this, that, we're not going into what people believe in, but the idea that you can have that connection, because addiction basically disconnects you from everything. So you have no connection. It's you and your drugs, and and then you're functioning on the outside. And the idea is to reconnect to people around you, and that's part of the pathway to a higher power.
It is, and I will also say, just with respect to connections, that I have a connection to Eilene, in that, I mean, aside from the fact, of course, that we both published books at around the same time, there are few people that can fully understand what she went through, what her family went through, how it's been sort of dealing with this, and what it was like living with an addict. There are the people that have lived with addicts, and then there are the addicts. And I think the same is true in reverse. I everything that she describes about her ex-husband, with the possible exception of the $2 million house by the beach, is me. That's me, and so I identify so much with him, but I also really understand your experience just as I know you understand mine.
Yes, actually hearing you talk is so, oddly wonderful for me, because it's like I can't ask Peter what was going on in his mind, but just you telling me that you tried to quit yourself. He had all of this paraphernalia planned, and he had withdrawal ease, all these natural things, and he would call up the math test. He was communicating with someone that he used with, saying like, I'm going to do it this weekend. And I remember thinking, this weekend, like after he died, like who kicks an intravenous drug habit that they've had for 18 months in a weekend, but somebody that powerful and that privileged does. And so it's not making a judgment, but it's interesting to see that that's what happens to your mind when you're in the throes of this. So
you're the smartest person in the room at all times. Addicts are convinced that like, I've got this and I'm gaming this system and I'm not going to die. This isn't going to get me. Even after ODing and having people like wake me up and what did I do that very same day? I used again. And that speaks also, I think, Rabbi, and you know this as well, to the power of addiction. It is so incredibly powerful. This is not a moral failing. This is not a lack of willpower. This is truly part of the human condition. This is a very real disease. It is classified as such by the American Medical Association, and it is real and it is powerful. And when it gets a grip on you, it is incredibly, incredibly difficult to break free.
I mean, my theory is that's why basically nothing can stop addiction, because it's so powerful. And the only thing that really can get kind of behind it and under it and kind of move in the right direction is the idea of spirituality. Again, how that plays out in everyone's life is different, but there has to be something so powerful to be able to give the person the motivation and the ability, and not alone, of course, to be able to overcome it. And also, I just want to say about the privileged people, a lot of times they have the downside because, yes, they get into treatment, they get into recovery, but a lot of times their ego and their pride is something that will not let them get the help. I'm a regular guy, I'm a kid, I say I need help, but over here, you're a powerful person. It's going to hit the papers. Everyone's going to know about your story. And for someone to be able to admit that they have this problem, it's going to take a lot. So, I mean, there's so many different stripes and shapes, but I've seen them all. And it looks like Amanda, we're going to be done by midnight.
The conversation is fantastic. I just wanted to give a quick reminder to folks that down at the very bottom, you'll see a Q&A function or a chat function. If you have a question or a comment for Dan or Eilene or Rabbi, please make sure you put that comment in there. And as I mentioned before, if you're interested in ordering a copy of Dan's book or Eileen's book or both of the books, I have links in the chat. So I highly encourage you to use that. So just continue the conversation. Just wanted to pop in and say that.
This is amazing. I love having this chat with you guys. I know this could last for a long time because we have so much to talk about, and we will. Let's do this. Could I be on the coffee chat?
Absolutely, Rabbi. Absolutely.
Yes.
Listen, I'd love to see what I can do to expand and help so many people in this world. It's our mission.
So we have a question that just came in. Do you think addiction is something that is more prevalent now because we know what it is, or has it always been this prevalent?
I mean, I could certainly answer that. I'm sure Eileen could too, but Rabbi, I suspect you would have the most sort of well-formed answer to that.
Well, the reality is that it's been here for generations. We have it in the Bible with Noah drinking and getting drunk and all
Opium
that.
wars,
we fought many stories throughout history. But today's generation, the plague of this generation, is drugs and alcohol addiction. We're not only addicted to alcohol and drugs and gambling and internet and all that, but to our phones. This is the disease of our generation. Let me tell you, I don't think there's been a time that this has been as deadly and as, even in the 60s, everyone was going around. We never had this. What we're having now is just beyond anyone's imagination. So that's what I see. I think today with the internet, people can get what they want quickly. The access is in, people have money, people have credit cards. There's so much that's driving this, that's fueling this. I mean, if I like alcohol and I want to drink, but I can't get a hold of it, it's not going to hurt me. But if once I get a hold of it, I can get a hold of it. I just walk anywhere, I have a credit card. So the ideas of young kids having their parents' credit cards. In the olden days, who had money? You had a few cents and that's it. That was the end of it. Today's days, the access, the potency of the drugs. There's so many things that are driving this, and the discontent. We're in a generation where there's a lot of stuff, but there's a lot of discontent that comes along with it. So, and the more we have, not necessarily does it fill that hole in our soul.
Yeah,
And this is where we have a tremendous hole in our soul these days. We all feel it. We all know about it. I point to myself and all of us. We are living in this generation. It is different. And so, yes, that's my answer. You want to add, anyone?
No, I mean, I think that was
Well said.
a whole lot better than I could have done. And
I will say that I have that one of the last chapters of my book is actually about that, how we've become this overconsumptive, kind of mindlessly consumptive society, because we're constantly, when I cleaned out Peter's house and he'd only lived there for 4 years, and it was full of duplicate bicycles and Sonos systems and just stuff he hadn't opened. There was just thousands of dollars worth of clothes, and just all it was this terribly sad evidence of somebody desperately trying to fill whatever it was that was discontent with stuff, which sounds like a cliche, but I think he became addicted to shopping. He was addicted to, there was lots of alcohol, lots of sweets, which is a very opioid addiction side effect, is a craving for sweets, but so much stuff. And even his iPad, when he died, he must have had like 7 windows up with stuff he wanted to buy, stuff, he was a runner, a special, at the time, a Garmin watch, this or that, like there was so much stuff. And I was thinking, like, what was it going to take? So I agree. And, when I was doing the research for the book, for the reporting part of the book, I interviewed a guy, Jud Brewer, he was one of the people that ran the Center for Mindfulness with John Kabat-Zinn at UMass. And he meditates, he's an addiction psychiatrist as well. And he wrote a book called The Craving Mind. And I said to him, like, Peter, I think he kept thinking like just this one more thing. And he said, that is the condition, like the human condition now is sort of this, we're uncomfortable, but we can't sit with it. We can't sit with it for 10 minutes. So we medicate it, and I think that you make a good point. And I think it's in the news all the time.
Great answer. Yeah, we have a couple questions for Dan, kind of piggybacking off of what you just said. Dan, do you think there was a way to treat your injury better that would not have led to an addiction?
Wow. I'm sure there was. Ultimately, I believe that there's a use for these medications. I believe that opioids should exist and that prescription painkillers are needed. They're certainly needed with regard to end-of-life care and comfort and things like that. And there are people that either post-operatively or after an injury need medication like this. And so I don't, while I believe that the pharmaceutical companies are complicit in this, and I could easily get into that's not the question. I'm sure there was, but for me, my injury required surgery, and I don't think that there was a way around that. But I think the doctors probably are looking at the prescription of these drugs differently now. I'm sober almost 13 years. In fact, in 2 weeks, it'll be 13 years of continuous sobriety.
It was bar mitzvah.
That's exactly right. So back then, it was easy to go and con doctors and con pharmacists, and I could see one doctor one morning and another doctor that very same afternoon, and go to one pharmacy and then cross the street and go to another pharmacy, and no red flags went up. I know that that's different now, and so I think it would be harder to be the type of addict I was today than it was then.
Thank you. You answered some of Sue's questions. She said, thank you both for being here and sharing your stories. Dan, she wanted to know how long you were addicted and how long you've been in recovery, which you've touched on. But she also wanted to know, was your family aware of your problem?
My family was aware of my problem in the same way that Eilene was aware of Peter's problem. They were aware that there was a problem, but they didn't know what it was specifically. And I write this in my book, and Eilene said it earlier, and it's still I felt it in my body when she said it, which is, what's wrong with you? And that was a question that was asked of me all the time. What's wrong with you? And I, of course, would be like, what's wrong with you? Because there's obviously something wrong with you. I'm fine. And that's where the gaslighting comes in. But so my family knew that I wasn't me. I wasn't the person that my mother used to say. After I got sober, I went back down to visit my family. They live in Baltimore. My mother looked at me, it's a couple months after being sober, and my mom nursed me back to health. I got sober in my mother's house. I went back to my life in New York. And when I came back down to Baltimore to visit a number of months later, my mother said, there you are. Like, I see you. I can see light in your eyes, and I can hear it in your voice that you're you again. And that's amazing. So they knew there was something wrong, but and now, of course, my family is aware, and I have three beautiful children, three sons who have only ever known me as a sober man and a sober dad, and I'm incredibly grateful for that. And I'm beginning to have conversations with them about my recovery, and it's really important for me that they understand who their dad is, and so my family has been unbelievably loving and supportive, and I know that that's not always the case, and I feel very blessed for that to be the case in my life.
Thank you. This question might be best for Rabbi, but anybody who wants to answer is more than welcome to. Someone's asking, are there such things as addictive and non-addictive personalities? Are some personality types more prone to addiction issues?
Well, it's like the guy, he's talking to his son, and his son is telling the son that we come from apes. And then he goes to his mom and he says, where do we come from? He says, from Adam and Eve. So the kid says to the mother, I don't understand. Dad said we come from apes. So the mom answered, that's his side of the family. What I'm saying is that there is a hereditary aspect to addiction. And that is, there's sometimes families that struggle with addiction, and it's prone in certain families. It's true. It's personality, and Jews say, oh, we don't have an addiction, but we're obsessive compulsive and everything else in between. So we definitely have it in our DNA. But today's society, even if you don't have the hereditary conditions, the young people today are being fed with a lot of this. Even if you're not so conditioned, you become conditioned in a negative way to drugs and alcohol. So there seems to be even people that are, obviously there are users, there are abusers, there are addicts, and there are dependents and addicts. So there are different kind of people involved with using. So not every person is an addict that uses drugs. Some people just it's less of a problem for them. But at the end of the day, if you're driving a car and you kill someone, and it's the first time you ever drank, and you never drink, and it's still considered vehicular homicide. So it's a problem, and it's so there are different ranges. There are different ranges. The answer is yes, there are people that are prone to it, but let me tell you, we're all leaning in a dangerous way, and especially the young people.
Thank you, Rabbi. And we're really lucky. We have Dr. Radosh joining us on this webinar, and he's actually an addiction specialist with Tower Health and Caron. And he just put into the chat that it's thought that about 50% of addiction is genetic, which means that some people are just more susceptible genetically to addiction. So thank you, Dr. Radosh, for adding that.
Comes with the other side of the family.
Another question here for Dan. Do you feel more spiritual from the time you spent healing, reflecting, and learning during your recovery?
I absolutely do. I feel really blessed. I feel really lucky, and I feel really grateful. And for me, gratitude is tied to spirituality. I am able to. I'm always able to take a minute. If there's something in my life that is stressing me, if there's something in my life that's a source of anxiety, or something in my life that's a source of fear, I take a minute to be grateful for what I have. And through that gratitude, my connection with a higher power, my spiritual connection, is strengthened. I think it's important for me to always remember how lucky I am to be alive today, how lucky I am to be present in the lives of my children today. On a beautiful day today, I was sitting in my little home office, which I'm in now, and windows were open. There was a nice cool breeze coming in, and all the stresses of work and kids and all of that. But I just took a moment, I felt the breeze, and I honestly will say that I said thank you. I feel incredibly grateful. So through gratitude, I have a much stronger spiritual connection.
Thank you. The next question, how do we stop the stigma? We have a family member who is seriously struggling with addiction. It's driving some family apart while other family is ignoring it in the hopes that people won't find out or it'll go away. I think part of the problem is the stigma of it. So
first of all, it's amazing, it's anonymous, but it's amazing that you're reaching out on this platform here. Like I said, we said earlier, it's a family disease, and everyone would need to, it's important that obviously, we're not going to solve the stigma problem tonight, and there is a stigma, so we're not going to argue about that. We know it's there, and we got to be concerned. You don't want to hurt anyone in the process, so it is a real thing. But what I would say, if there's a way, you don't need to reach out to me, but you can reach out to somebody, like the Radar or someone else, we would be happy to. It's not like you can answer this question. There are many different moving parts, and in order to really help your situation, we would have to analyze, have a little discussion, and see what the best pathway is to get everyone on board. Because the most important thing, especially in the circumstance you're talking about, is to get everyone on the same page and move forward. So it's possible, and it could be done. And if you reach out to me privately through Amanda, whatever, we could, and even if this is the only reason, the only gain we had from having this Zoom call, and we can help this one person, Diana, we've succeeded. So I hope we do.
This is from Bill. Thank you both for your courage in speaking with us tonight. If someone has come out with their problems, what are comforting words for us to say to the afflicted and or the family?
So what is it, over at midnight or before? This has been amazing. Thank you, both of you. This is a lot of fun. And I mean, yes, we used when we got together last time, we used the word, I think Dan used the word fun, and then he was like, maybe it's not fun, but we actually had fun. So
Fun.
let's admit it, let's be, honesty is a tough thing, but around it. But anyways, it's been fun. It has been fun. So thank you again for everyone participating. This is so incredibly important. So thank you.
Does anyone have comforting
I
words
could-
that you would say to the families?
I could say something both as someone who's been a family member affected and also as a newly minted social worker who I worked with people that struggled with addiction the first year of my field work. But I think it's really important to let the person that's talking to you know that you hear them. So I just think that the comforting words could be something sort of like, I hear what you're saying, and trying to empathize. Like, it must be very hard to tell me this. I know it's taking a lot of courage to tell me this. I can imagine that you're in a lot of pain, and just I think it's really important to be really present and not to sound like a cliche, and just to really be empathetic and acknowledge to the person that you're hearing them, you're not afraid, that you want to help them, and that you empathize with the pain that they're going through, and whatever shame or embarrassment or physical pain they're going, like, you empathize and understand and want to help. I think you can acknowledge that and say, I hear you. It sounds like it's very painful. I imagine this has been really hard for you, that kind of thing.
But sometimes, and that was the question, I think I read a little bit of it. Sometimes there's a rift in the family, how to go about it. So let's say there's a child that's an addict, and then you have the parents, and the mother is protective, and she doesn't want anyone to know, her friends, and she's like, this is a big secret, we're going to mess everything up. And the dad said, I don't really care. I'm going to get my kid help. And there's like this whole battle, and everyone's on a different page. And that battle adds more, grief, everyone, and it pushes people further apart. And what we would want to do in a case like this, that's what it seemed like from the question, Amanda, that there was like a different way. Everyone's thinking you got to go a different angle. And the idea is to get everyone together and move as a unit forward, even without the addict sometimes. And there's a healing, and, to Eilene, sometimes there's healing without the addict. I mean, you've proven that you were able to heal from a pain that you had, that you only found out about after your husband died. You only found out about this, and you had to go through your own healing process without him, which is incredible. But you've done a great job, and you're an example to so many others that there is healing for families as well. And that's what I think that's what we're talking about.
I see. Sorry about that.
No, no, it's all important, but I think the listening to people is the number one thing, to acknowledge people's pain. And even the person, when they're arguing about something, your point, the husband thinks one thing and the wife thinks another, but if they can actually listen to each other and not shout over each other, it's not a debate. No politics, right? No, I have to put that in. Okay. We want to thank the Federation for putting this together.
Thank you so much, Eilene and Dan, for being here, and Rabbi for moderating for us. I hope everyone got something out of it tonight. Hopefully we were able to help even just one person. In the chat are the links to the copies of the books. We really encourage you to read both their stories. They're amazing. And we invite you to attend our next event, which is Monday night with Dr. Abigail Gurwitz, talking about anxiety and parenting, especially important during these trying times. So thank you, everybody, and have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Once we sign off, does that link disappear for the books?
It will, yes. But
So
I will send it out as a follow-up.
Thank you.
Send it out to everyone, because you could get the e-version.
ebook on sale next Tuesday.
I want to make sure
For
people
5 days, so hop on it.
are going to be one of the people, so you got at least one customer.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, everybody.
2 cents for that, but I wouldn't.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank